Hi, my name is Allison. I'm the Wellness Manager at Mount St. Mary's University and a registered dietitian. Thanks so much for joining me for the Mount's Digital Dish series. Today's segment is called Whole Grains for the Holidays, and we'll be making 2 recipes showcasing whole grains. As a registered dietitian, I'm all about helping people incorporate more healthy foods into their everyday life in a way that still tastes delicious. If you're cooking along with me, you'll see that we have a lot of ingredients, but the recipes come together really easily. So as we go, you'll see what I mean. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 375 degrees. I've already done that. Second, we're going to start with our muffin recipe, so we're going to prep our raisins. I have 2/3 of a cup of raisins here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to plump these up by adding some hot water. So on my stove, I have just about a cup of water going. It doesn't have to come to a boil, it just needs to be warm or hot. So you can see mine's a little steamy. And I'm just gonna pour my water over the raisins and set them aside for later. This is gonna get them nice and plumped up. Now I'm gonna keep my flame on the stove for now because our second recipe is a farro salad. So I'm gonna get started on prepping the farro because it takes about 15-20 minutes to cook. While that's prepping, we're gonna work on our muffins. Today we're making morning glory muffins. They're really delicious, and a secret is they actually have vegetables in them. You can kind of think of them like carrot cake muffins, but they're made with a whole grain flour. They have raisins, apples, nuts, lots of delicious things, plus vegetables, so super duper nutritious as well. So while my burner's on, we're gonna get the farro started for our farro salad. So farro is a very interesting whole grain, one of the lesser known grains. It's actually like if you picture a stalk of wheat, farro is like those little berries at the top of the stalk of wheat. So they have kind of a chewy texture, nutty, and a little bit of crunch in there as well. Really delicious. And when you're cooking farro, it cooks just like rice. So double the liquid to the amount of grain. But when you're cooking, do yourself a favor and cook with broth. I'm using veggie stock today. You can use chicken broth or beef stock. It just adds flavor to the farro so that it's already delicious when you put it in whatever it is you're making. So I'm gonna do 2 cups of stock to 1 cup of farro. And again, just like rice, we're gonna bring it to a boil first, and then cover it and let it simmer. So on the package of farro, it'll probably say 2.5 cups to 1 cup of grain. Now I've messed around with this a lot, and I always get a lot of liquid left over when I do 2.5 cups. Every stove is different, so it could just depend on how high your heat is, what kind of stove you're using. But for now, we're gonna try it with 2 cups liquid to 1 cup grain and see how that goes. You can always add liquid, and even if you do have too much liquid, you can always strain it away. So no worries here on the farro. We'll test this out in about 15 minutes. For now, we're gonna start on our muffin recipe, our morning glory muffins. Now they're called morning glory muffins because with all these fruits, vegetables, whole grains, you're just gonna have a glorious morning. So we'll start with our flour and mix all our dry ingredients together. I have 2 cups of white whole wheat flour. So people don't know this about whole grains, but there's a lot of different types of wheat. We're using 100% white whole wheat. So this doesn't mean it's white flour, it's white whole wheat flour. That just means the actual stalk of wheat is a lighter variety. So when you see whole grains in the store that are brown, that actually comes from red wheat. So there's white wheat and red wheat. We're using white whole wheat flour. It's really important in baking, actually, if you can weigh many of your dry ingredients, especially your flour and your sugar. So I've already done that. So if you don't have a scale at home, that's okay. This is about 2 cups of flour or 240 grams. I just use a little food scale like this. And that's because the flour can really get packed into your measuring cups. So you'll get a much more accurate bake if you weigh your flour. Up next is our sugar. I'm using light brown sugar. This is 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons, or 225 grams. So I'm gonna add that right in with my flour. Next up are my spices. So something I really love about this recipe is just how flavorful it is. We go really heavy on the spices here. So we have a full tablespoon of cinnamon. We have a teaspoon of ground ginger. I want to make sure you get all of that goodness in there. This is a half teaspoon of salt. And then we have baking powder to make it all rise. This is 2 teaspoons of baking powder. No baking soda in this recipe. And that's all our dry ingredients. So I'm just gonna mix this around and set this aside. I'm gonna start working on my fruits and veggies. So I have 4 beautiful carrots here. I've already peeled them. And what we're gonna do to add them into our recipe is just grate them up. I'm using my handy dandy food processor because it just makes this process so much easier. If you have a cheese grater or a box grater, that's fine. You can go ahead and use that. But we're all about quick recipes these days. So if you do have a food processor, they're not very expensive and they're a great kitchen tool to invest in. So I'm just gonna pop my tops off of the carrots. And I'm gonna go ahead and peel my apple. So if you have folks in your family that don't love vegetables, or it's a little tricky to get them to eat enough vegetables, you could call these muffins carrot cake muffins and you would not be lying, because they do taste like carrot cake. They would be delicious with a little cream cheese frosting on the top. But as a breakfast or a brunch, when these are baking in the oven, that cinnamon and that ginger and those apples, it smells so good and inviting. And if you're cooking along with me and this is the first time you're making a recipe like this, by the end of this, you're going to be the expert. And it could be a really fun holiday, quarantine activity for you to teach this recipe after you become the expert to your family on the other end of the phone. So now that this is all peeled, I'm just gonna cut this into rough chunks to put in the food processor. It is totally okay if there's a little bit of peel still on the apple. That is no problem. Just checking on my farro, it's not boiling yet. So if you do have a food processor, they typically come with a couple of attachments. So this is the grater attachment that we're going to use, and it is great as it grates because it just makes that process so quick. The other side is a blade, so if you need something thinly sliced, that's really easy to do as well. So I'm gonna put the grater attachment up and just make sure you don't have the spinning blade still inside, because then our pieces will be a little bit too finely chopped. I'm always also thinking about like how kids can help in the kitchen, especially when developing family recipes. So this is a great job for the kids to do, because with this attachment, it keeps this process really safe. So I'm gonna turn my food processor on, brace for a loud sound. And then just press down. All right, see, that was fast. By the end of the hour, you might still be grating if you were using your box grater at home. And then what's really fun too, if kids are helping you with this, you get these like fun shapes with these chips at the end. So I've worked with kids for a really long time as well. I was a camp counselor at a nutrition and gardening camp. And the key to get the kids to eat pretty much anything, but especially fruits and vegetables, was to just change the shape of them. So if you can serve something in a unique or silly shape, that is typically a great way to get kids to eat a little bit more nutritious. So I'm just gonna set these aside. We've got our dry ingredients, we've got our fruit and veggies. Now we're gonna work on our wet ingredients. So I'm actually gonna take one of my other bowls, because we're gonna crack 3 eggs. And in general, it's always good to crack your eggs into a different vessel than your mixing bowl, just in case you get any shells in there. And even though it's behind me, I am using my ears while I'm cooking, and I can hear that my farro is boiling on the stove. Yep, there it goes. So I'm just gonna cover it and turn the heat down so that it just simmers. I'm here in the Doheny Mansion kitchen at the Doheny campus. It's so beautiful and so old and so amazing that everything still works so well, but it's really fun to be in here. Just think about all the parties the Dohenys must have had around the holidays. Okay, so wet ingredients, we have our 3 eggs with no shell. We have 2/3 of a cup of vegetable oil. This is just canola oil. And then I'm gonna do 1/4 of a cup of orange juice. If you wanted to get really fancy and squeeze your own, that would just be about 1 orange. This will add a really nice sweetness to the muffins, as well as even more moisture. Okay. I'm gonna whisk this all together. I'm gonna add the vanilla. You can use pure vanilla extract here. Imitation vanilla extract is also a fine substitute. Vanilla can be pretty expensive. It lasts in your pantry for a really long time, but imitation will work just fine. And we're gonna use 2 teaspoons. There you go, little extra for that one. There we go. So we have our wet ingredients, our dry ingredients, fruits, veggies, nuts. I'm gonna head over to the sink to drain my raisins because they've plumped up, they've absorbed some of that water. This is a step that you can definitely skip. It just adds a little extra juiciness to the raisins when they're baking. Nothing fancy, you don't have to wring them out or anything, just drain the water off. I'm gonna take this other fork, whisk together my dry ingredients a little bit more and kind of break up some of those clumps of sugar. And so this is what I meant when I was saying that though there are a lot of ingredients, they do come together really quickly. We're just about done and ready to assemble, and then we could put it in our muffin tin and we'll be good to go. In the recipe, this also calls for shredded coconut. You can use sweetened or unsweetened. When I went to the store, there was no coconut. So this is really adaptable. You can add or subtract anything that you don't like. Use cranberries instead of raisins. Use any kind of nut that you like, or leave out the nuts if you have an allergy in your family. I'm always looking for recipes that are really adaptable to families so that you can eat with your preferences. Okay, so in most baking recipes, you're gonna add your dry ingredients to your wet. In this recipe, it's actually the other way around. We'll add our wet ingredients to our dry. I'm gonna give that a stir. So something I love about the white whole wheat flour is that it just has a finer texture than regular whole wheat flour, the one that comes from the red wheat. I think when people think about baking with whole wheat, they think about that sort of gritty texture of the red whole wheat, which would just be called whole wheat flour in the store. But white whole wheat definitely has a finer texture and is more close to all-purpose flour. If you can't find white whole wheat flour in the store, you can look for whole wheat pastry flour because it's the same thing. Okay, now I'm gonna fold in my fruits and veggies. Make sure I get all those carrots in there. This recipe is really great because if you have some carrots in your fridge that you haven't used that are like about to go, you could totally make these muffins. Same with the apples. I used a Granny Smith apple because that tartness bakes really well into these muffins. Any apple that you have will be fine. Fold in my nuts. Actually, I'm gonna give these nuts a little bit of a chop. These were in the halves and pieces bag, but they're just a little bit big. If you like them big like this, you can go ahead and toss them right in. I'm just gonna make them a little bit smaller. Typically when I bake, I'll buy the nut in the whole form and just chop it myself. It ends up being a little less expensive because you're not paying for the process to have been done for you. And it's just so easy. If you're a nut-free house, you can definitely do sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds, pepitas, instead of any nut. That'll still give you that nice sort of nutty flavor without the nuts or the allergy. Okay, that looks good. And then my raisins. You see how they plumped up? Toss them right in. And stir that all together. So this is definitely one of those ways to incorporate more vegetables into your day in a way that maybe you haven't thought of, like vegetables for breakfast. Who knew? And I never recommend being sneaky about vegetables. Some parents will ask, like, how can I sneak more vegetables to my kids? And I recommend just serving them and then telling them how much they liked them if it turns out that they did like them. You don't have to sneak them carrots in this muffin. When they eat the muffin and they say it's good, be like, did you know there were carrots in there? Now they know that they like carrots. So I'm going to use some muffin liners in my muffin tin. This is another really good opportunity to be festive. My muffin liners have some snowflakes on them, so you could definitely use any kind of holiday themed muffin liner. You could, of course, just put your batter directly into the muffin tin. But again, I want to keep this quick and easy, and cleanup is a breeze when we use muffin liners. Great. And then I have this scooper that I'm going to use to scoop my batter into the muffin liner. My mom let me borrow this. She said, you can use this for your show, because she knew we were making muffins. I don't have one of these at home. If you're using a spoon or a measuring cup, that's totally fine. But this is just really fun. It's like an ice cream scoop. So you want to fill up your muffin cups pretty high so you can get that nice dome on the top. And then if you get any on the side of the muffin tin, we'll just wipe that off before we put it in the oven. That way it doesn't burn. So what's the deal with whole grains anyway, right? Why whole grains for the holidays? Why do dietitians tell people to eat whole grains? Well, whole grains are really, really nutritious. They are full of fiber, which keeps you full. And really isn't that, besides like the joy of eating, the whole point is to stay fueled up. And fiber does that for you. It helps you feel fuller longer. And whole grains have more fiber than their counterpart, refined grains. So that's like the difference between white bread and whole wheat bread, white pasta and whole wheat pasta, white rice and brown rice. The whole grain equivalent will have more fiber and more vitamins. So it's a really nutritious, alternative to refined grains. Now, I think where people think that they don't like whole grains is because they're often using them as a substitute in a recipe. So, if you're making spaghetti and meatballs and you use whole wheat pasta, yeah, it might not taste the same and it might really not be as good. So I recommend finding recipes where the whole grain is the star. The recipe is about using the whole grain, not just substituting a refined grain for this more nutritious alternative, because then you're not going to like it and you're not going to eat it, and then what's the point? So both recipes that I'm using today, the whole grain really is the star. It tastes great. We're not substituting anything or healthifying anything. We're just using naturally nutritious foods in really delicious ways. I always tell people you don't have to eat foods that you don't like to be healthy. You can eat the foods you love and still be a healthy person. And really, nutrition, for me, in my practice, is all about what you can add, not what you take away. It's all about variety and increasing the types of things that you eat, not taking anything out. So, you know, this new year, when all of the New Year's resolution, diet stuff is coming your way, you can just ignore that and keep adding variety into what you eat. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Maybe a little more here. And I'll just wipe off some of my spills so that we don't get little crispy bits that are hard to clean. All right, so this is gonna go into our 375-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll start with 20, check on them, and then see how we did. All right, I'm gonna get cleaned up over here, and then we're gonna make our farro salad. All right, so hopefully you got the chance to put some of your dishes from our muffins into the sink, set them aside, we'll clean them up later. We are moving on to our farro salad with a Dijon vinaigrette. So while our muffins are cooking, our farro is cooking on top of the stove. Mine is done. Here it is, the finished product. So you can see nice and fluffy. I'm gonna give it a taste. So it's chewy, it has a little bit of crunch, and this really delicious nutty flavor. I love farro, the texture is really delicious. So on my stove, I have some boiling water going. That's because part of this salad is green beans, and we're actually gonna blanch them. Blanching vegetables is one of my favorite ways to cook vegetables because it is just so easy and fast. So we have about half a pound of green beans here. Come on over to the stove. I have sort of a little pot here, so I'm just gonna fit what I can in. This is the same pot I used for the farro, so you don't have to wash your pot in between. Just give it a rinse, and then you can add more water to boil. And make sure my beans are submerged. I'm gonna let that go for 4 minutes on the stove. And then I'm going to plunge my beans into an ice water bath. So in about 4 minutes, you'll see what that looks like. In the meantime, I'm gonna get my other ingredients ready. So I have 1 English cucumber, I have about a pint or 2 cups of cherry tomatoes, and a bag of arugula. This recipe was meant to be used for you as a template for any grain salad that you could ever wanna make. So if you make this and you're like, farro is not for me, you could substitute farro for any grain that you like. You could substitute it for brown rice, wild rice, quinoa, really anything that you like, pasta even. I'm using a cucumber and tomatoes. You could use any 2 uncooked vegetables, so that could look like radishes, bell peppers, whatever you like. You could use some of the leftover carrots from our muffins. Now, whenever I peel a cucumber, I always like to leave it striped. I don't know, I think it gives it a little something extra. And then after your 2 raw veggies, you'll do 1 cooked veggie. So I'm doing green beans, you could do squash, you could do roasted beets, you could do whatever you like. And then for your green, really any hearty green will do. Spinach, kale, chard, whatever is your favorite. I would stay away from romaine for this recipe. It's just a little bit too delicate, but I love the peppery flavor of the arugula, and it goes really nicely with our lemony dressing that we're gonna make. So I am just slicing these cucumbers thinly into quarters. And as I go, you could just add it right into your bowl with the farro. I can hear my beans boiling away back there, so remember to cook with all of your senses. Okay. And for my cherry tomatoes, I'm just going to cut these in half. So I've been teaching cooking classes for about 5 years, When I became a dietitian, it wasn't something I knew I was going to have to do. In dietitian school, we do take cooking classes because a lot of dietitians end up working in food service or food management. But at my first dietitian job, I was doing a lot of cooking classes for kids, for adults, for families. So I've worked with eaters of all ages. And the one thing I love about it is nutrition can be really confusing, but everybody eats. And nutrition is really all about the food, right? It's not about rules, it's not about numbers, it's not about nutrients, it's about food. So cooking classes are sort of a way to bridge the gap between the theoretical pieces of nutrition and the actual food, which of course is my favorite part. So hopefully if you're cooking along with me, this hasn't been too challenging and you're seeing how quickly these recipes do come together. I think that's enough for the tomatoes. Feel free to eyeball it with this recipe. I hear my beans boiling away. It's been about 4 minutes, so I'm going to drain them into the sink using my spider. This is one of my favorite kitchen tools. I have it in 3 sizes. Can't recommend it highly enough. So if you are able, the spider is a great tool. So I'll drain my beans and put them right into a bowl of ice water. What this does is it stops the cooking process. So it'll just freeze them at this cooked temperature right here. They're perfectly cooked. You can see they're bright green. And if you taste them, they won't be mealy or chewy. They'll be just have that little snap and they'll be perfectly cooked. We'll leave that for about a minute or 2 and then drain the water off and pat it dry with a towel. So any veggie can really be cooked this way. You could blanch broccoli, cauliflower, and it's really easy. If I wanted to, after this, I could saute this on the stove with some garlic and it would be really delicious, but they'd already be perfectly cooked. All right, so we're gonna move on to our dressing. If you can start making your own dressing at home, you're really gonna level up your salad game. This dressing is really delicious, has a couple ingredients. Our star here is Dijon mustard, and it's really funny, and this is something I like to tell kids. I hate mustard, like by itself, but as an ingredient, I love it. So if you have some picky eaters who are like a little afraid to try things, tell them maybe they'll like it as an ingredient, but they don't have to eat it by itself, of course. So we're gonna start with our acid here. We're gonna do 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So if you're shopping in the store, dressings are often held shelf stable, which means there's a lot of stuff in it that keeps it from going bad on the shelf for a long time, which is, totally fine. But if you want to make something a little bit fresher that doesn't need any added preservatives, it's a great idea to make your dressing at home. So that was about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Just as a tip, I always like to wash the citrus that I use, that way when the knife cuts through it, if there's any germs on the outside, that doesn't get into the lemon. So give that a little rinse before you cut into it. That was about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Next up is apple cider vinegar. So we're doing double acid in our salad dressing. We have lemon juice and then vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is one of those very trendy foods for some reason now. So no, you don't need to be drinking apple cider vinegar in the morning to be a healthy person, absolutely not. If you do, the reasoning behind that, I'm doing 2 tablespoons, by the way, of apple cider vinegar. If you use a raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, you can see it has these little floaties in it. So this is actually a fermented food, and that's what's known as a SCOBY, or a symbiotic culture of yeast and bacteria. So this is like a living thing. And that bacteria is good bacteria. So when you do drink apple cider vinegar, use it as an ingredient, that bacteria actually helps your gut to be healthier. So that's why people do drink it. If you are going to do that, definitely dilute it in some water and definitely make sure you're using the kind that has SCOBY or is raw and unfiltered and not just an apple cider vinegar flavored vinegar. So next up, we're gonna add our olive oil. Just any extra virgin olive oil will do. About 1/4 of a cup. And then last, we're gonna do, or second to last rather, a teaspoon, up to 2 teaspoons of mustard. If you're like me and you're not a big fan, you could do the smaller amount. That's a 1/2 teaspoon, and that's a whole teaspoon. Now we're up to our last ingredient here, which is a clove of garlic. So I'm just gonna press down on my knife to pop the peel off. And then we can mince this up. Smells so good. If you're not a garlic fan, you could totally leave that out. No big deal. Okay. This is a big clove, so I'm really gonna use like 1/2 of it. All right, I'm gonna add the lid, and then just shake it up. You can use a Tupperware container, a mason jar, anything that won't make a mess. There we go. So as you can see, our mustard helped our vinegar and our lemon juice blend with the oil, so it acted as an emulsifier. All right, so I'm gonna set that aside. Time to get working on my beans. I'm gonna drain off the water. And then I'm just gonna pat these dry. My perfectly cooked beans. And the reason you don't want to cut these before you put them in the water is because then water will actually get into the beans and sort of waterlog them. So better to do them as a whole and then slice them once they're done. So I'm just really gonna cut these into like bite-sized pieces. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other thing about these two recipes is they're very rustic, so they don't have to look perfect at all. In they go. I'm gonna add my greens. So we'll just add about just like 1/2 a bag. I'm gonna toss this all together and see what we look like. All right, yeah. So my amounts are looking good here. It's time to add the dressing. So I'll just pour this all over. So this is looking really festive with our little red tomatoes, our arugula looking like little holly leaves. So I think if you are having like a big holiday dinner, it's always so nice to get something fresh on the table. There's always like a lot of starches, a lot of potato foods, a lot of delicious casseroles and that kind of thing. If you can lighten up the plate a little bit, and I don't mean calorie-wise, I just mean the actual weight of the food, it's always like a welcome, refreshing aspect of the meal. All right, finishing touches on our salad. First, some basil. This will add just another bright note. It's gonna taste really delicious with the lemon. And again, I'm cooking with all my senses. I can start smelling my muffins that are in the oven. They are almost done and the cinnamon is smelling so good. All right, so I'm gonna do a technique here called chiffonade. It's French for ribbon, so it sounds very fancy, but it's very easy. You're just going to stack your basil leaves on top of each other and roll them up like a little burrito, and then just cut from the top. So for basil, any herb really, you want to make this like the last thing that you do with the recipe, because when you cut into the herb, it's magic. Its scents start to release. So you want to make sure it's like one of the last parts of your recipe. So you don't need to prep your basil way ahead of time. We always want to make that like one of the last things we do. And finally, I'm going to head to the fridge. I have some feta cheese. So any cheese you like. Again, this recipe is meant to be adaptable to what you like. So the recipe can call for goat cheese, you could use Parmesan cheese, really anything. So I'm gonna add some feta on top. Our little snowdrift of feta. Toss it up. And there you go, that is your farro salad with a Dijon vinaigrette. All right, so here are my beautiful morning glory muffins, fresh out of the oven. They smell so good. That cinnamon and ginger is just all in the air. They smell so delicious. I'm just imagining somebody making them for me on the morning of a holiday, coming down the stairs and getting a whiff of these muffins. So one tip is, after they're cool enough to touch, tilt your muffins down in the pan. This allows any moisture to not get trapped in those muffin cups, and it won't leave any residue inside your muffin tin, and it'll just keep the muffins from becoming greasy. So I'm going to plate up our beautiful farro salad with Dijon vinaigrette. So if you're not a salad person, mixing it up by adding different types of grains is such a great way to try new things and get more vegetables into your day. And I don't know about you, but I am just dying to see what these muffins look like on the inside. So I will remove my festive wrapping. Oh wow, yeah, look at that. Our raisins are so plump. This looks just like a delicious carrot cake. Can't wait to eat that. So in the morning, you can add butter to that. It would be so delicious. Or if you really do want to go all out and make carrot cake muffins, you could definitely add a cream cheese icing on top and turn this into a dessert instead of a breakfast item. Thank you so much for cooking with me today. My name's Allison. Thank you for joining me for the Mounds Digital Dish series. Happy holidays!